Hi, everyone. Welcome to Garlic Week, the first week of our Eat Winter Vegetables Sagra for the year 2020, 2021. This is our virtual Sagra taking place of our in-person event that we can't have this year due to COVID, but are really excited for this opportunity to be able to meet up with you all virtually and have some really fantastic event speakers for the entire Sagra, including Garlic Week, that normally we wouldn't even be able to have here physically. So I'm super excited this morning to introduce you to my friend, Phil Simon, who's coming to us live from Madison, Wisconsin today. Hi, Phil. You can turn on your camera if you like. And you're on mute still. You can unmute.
There we go. Okay. Hi.
I'm so happy to have you here. I just wanted to say that I remember when I met you, of course, I had heard about you before I met you, and I was in Madison for a meeting maybe 6 or 7 years ago, and I ran into you in the hallway and just so excited to meet you. I knew about you from carrots because I knew you worked with carrots. And when I met you, you were in your lab and you had a really bright carrot shirt on, which I thought, this is a really fantastic sign, someone that's so excited about the crop that they work with, that they're going to wear it on their shirt. We proceeded to start talking and just got such a wonderful, warm feeling from you. And just seeing all the exuberation and excitement that you have about the crops and the vegetables that you work with is just always a really great sign in a plant breeder. I think you just have so much love for what you do. So
well, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell that you enjoy it, and
Yes.
to give some context to you, maybe some of the people that are tuning in have met you at the Variety Showcase, which is a big event that the Culinary Breeding Network puts on, and you came twice, I think.
I think 3 times now. I think it's
okay,
been.
Great for that, and your work is represented often, even when you haven't been there, with Organic Seed Alliance and the carrot project that you work on. And so, I knew that you worked with garlic, and I'm very excited to have you here today to talk about garlic. I just wanted to give people a little bit of background. I read about your bio that, you did your PhD there in Wisconsin. You have been in Wisconsin for a long time now.
Long time. Yes. Yeah. Like I was born here too. So.
Yeah. So and since the late 70s, you've been working there at USDA.
Right.
And so you're at USDA, the Agriculture Research Service, based in Madison. You also, I'm very impressed with writing. I don't like to write papers myself, and you've written over 200 papers and trained about more than 30 PhD students. So really educating young people and putting them out into the world to do good work. And just read a couple, I was just going to mention a couple of your awards, which have been many, but you have an honorary doctorate from the Agricultural University in Krakow in Poland. And also you won the National Association of Plant Breeders Lifetime Achievement Award. And I think that is all really fantastic and very well deserved. And you're such an impressive person and such a, like I said, an exuberant person about the things that you work with. So you're very appreciated in the world. And the last thing I'll say before we show your presentation is we really connected over flavor. And I just remember that right away. You're like, God, we just gotta get, he's like, I really like what you're doing. You're talking about flavor because not enough people talk about flavor.
Right.
It's the first thing that you talk about often when we talk about carrots or garlic or whatever is just, bringing that back to the public, which is important.
Right. And everybody wants to talk about garlic flavor. So this is a great topic that you're presenting this week, Lane. I sure appreciate your effort to put this together.
But thank you so much for participating and being the first person to kick it off with the history of garlic and sharing a little bit about a garlic excursion that you went on. So Abba is our tech person. Thank you so much, Abba. We're going to put ourselves on mute and stop our videos, and she's going to share the screen so we can watch this pre-recorded video that Phil has done for us. And then you guys are on YouTube right now. Please place your questions in the chat box in YouTube and let us know what your questions are, because this will be about 20 minutes long. We'll come back and Phil will answer those questions for you. Okay, check you back in a few minutes.
Hi, I'm Phil Simon. I'm here today to talk to you about the history of garlic. Before I begin my talk, let me extend my thanks to Elaine Selman for organizing this series of talks on garlic and for giving me the opportunity to talk to you about the history of garlic. I got interested in garlic history as I got interested in the possibility of breeding garlic, and to better approach the breeding of the garlic crop, I wanted to find out what kind of historical record there was about the diversity of the crop and what the domestication record for the crop might be. So let's take a look at some slides to go through this process of looking at the history of garlic. And one moment, we'll get these slides started, and there we go. So in looking at the possibility, the prospects of breeding a crop, it's important to have a handle on what the diversity of the crop you're interested in breeding is. Here we see the diversity of crops like apples, maize, beans, carrots, and tomatoes, and that diversity is what plant breeders capture in order to improve the crop. How about garlic diversity? Well, we know that cultivated garlic is quite diverse in terms of bulb shape, size, maturity. And we also know that garlic cultivated is divided into two categories, either soft-neck garlic, which has no flower stalk, or hard-neck garlic, which does have a flower stalk. But not much information is out there about the broadest range of diversity of garlic, namely wild garlic. And sometimes wild relatives of crops have been very valuable in terms of improving the crop. And so, whereas we have some idea about garlic diversity, we could learn a lot more, I thought, in terms of looking at wild garlic. Another way to look at the role of the wild relatives is to think about where our domesticated crops came from. Cultivated carrots came from this wild white-rooted relative. Cultivated wheat came from a smaller grained wheat, which with a number of other morphological differences. Cultivated potatoes came from can be bred with wild relatives, but there wasn't much known when I got interested in garlic breeding in the 1980s about wild garlic. It was known that there is a wild version of garlic, but not much about exactly how well it compares to cultivated garlic. So I got looking at the historical record of garlic, and there's three ways to trace the history of a crop. Historical records in terms of the renderings of the artistic renderings of the crop, and written record by people using the crop over history, by looking at preserved specimens of the crop that can be found today, and by looking at living plants, both wild and cultivated today, and comparing them in appearance and comparing them in terms of DNA fingerprints. So let's take a look at the history of garlic. In the case of garlic, we have a very extensive archaeological and written record of history with garlic depicted in wall hangings and other forms in Egypt up to 5,000 years ago. Likewise in Iraq or Mesopotamia with garlic tonic recipes, and garlic referred to with many names in written history of India up to 5,000 years ago. More recently, up to about 4,000 years ago, garlic referred to in Chinese legends and also referred to in Solomon's diet in Israel. So a long history of written and archaeological records of garlic. Homer may have been referring to garlic, probably was in about 2,800 years ago, referring to garlic flowers, obviously a hardneck garlic. And when we come to the last 1,000 years, there's many depictions of garlic in Europe, including these depictions of soft-neck garlic in Germany around 1600. So the historical record for history is quite strong. The preserved specimens for garlic is also quite strong in that there are preserved specimens of garlic that go back up to 6,000 years ago from the Cave of Treasure in Israel, up to about 5,000 years ago in Egypt. You may have heard of garlic being in King Tut's tomb, and the garlic in the tomb apparently is very easy to identify as garlic. Obviously very dried down, but it's very clearly garlic. And then dried down samples of garlic in a couple of sites in Mesopotamia up to 4,000 years ago, and in Crete up to about 3,700 years ago. So preserved specimens of garlic are also available in quite good numbers. When you look at the case, though, of wild garlic, as I said before, not much in terms of wild garlic to compare to cultivated garlic. So I got interested in the question of, where can you find wild garlic? Well, if you want to find wild garlic, you look at the records that botanists have put together. It's thought that wild garlic occurred 10,000 years ago, all the way from the Atlantic Ocean in southern Europe and North Africa to Central Asia, and beyond the circle to the east, even into China. Probably wild garlic occurred 10,000 years ago. But in the last 10,000 years, the climate has gotten very dry in this region, especially in North Africa and the Middle East, and consequently the current range of wild garlic is in a much smaller region today, primarily in Central Asia and slightly off to the west, over here between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. There certainly is wild garlic today. If we take a look at this region a little more closely of where garlic occurs today, it's an interesting historic region because the Silk Road ran through this region, Silk Road running from the Mediterranean to China, a trade route that people like Marco Polo traveled on and carried goods to Europe and to Asia in the process. No doubt carrying some of the first garlics into parts of Europe in this process on the Silk Road, and into China on the Silk Road. Those people traveling through the Silk Road had an opportunity to actually be carrying garlic with them, and probably did. Today, the region is a bit challenging for those of us with American passports to visit. Iran and Afghanistan aren't the easiest place to get into to collect wild garlic, which I was interested in doing. And in the 1980s, the relationships between the Soviet Union and the US were not particularly friendly until the latter part of the 1980s, when the diplomatic relationships between the US and the Soviet Union got warmer, and gave me a chance to write a proposal to collect garlic in the Soviet Union. So I'm going to talk about two collecting expeditions. The first one is this expedition 1989 to the Soviet Union. The proposal was written around 1987. The USDA germplasm collection office worked with the Soviets to approve the travel, identified a collaborator for me to travel with, and we had a collecting team from the US. The three of us from the US were myself, Leonard Pike, John Swenson in this left picture, and the local collaborator with us throughout the trip was Alexei Pimakov. Also along on the trip was Teresa Kotlinska from Poland, a European garlic expert. When you collect on an expedition like this, you pick up, for everything you pick up, be it seed or bulbs, we leave half of it in the country with the locals like Alexei Pimakov. The other half comes back to the USDA germplasm collection. When we did our collecting, we visited the towns and cities along the way, partly to see what they looked like, partly to see what life was like. And here's a street scene in 1989 in Uzbekistan. Here's another street scene in Uzbekistan, a little bit more foreign, with camels going down the road. But as we're collecting, we were primarily interested in collecting wild garlic. We also were interested in collecting cultivated garlic that was available in the markets. And here's one of the cultivated garlic that we picked up in this Soviet trip in 1989. But getting to the heart of the matter, here's the countryside where wild garlic occurs. This is the border area between Uzbekistan and Kyrgyzstan in the Chatkal Reserve, which is like a national park, but with actually more limitations of people visiting than our national parks. We went to the Chatkal Reserve with these military vehicles that our Soviet collaborators provided for us. We camped along the way, which got to be a little bit rough along the way, but we managed. And when we got to the reserve, we couldn't drive the vehicles inside, so we packed up our gear and got on horseback and went into the reserve to collect wild garlic. We also collected other wild relatives of garlic and onion, and also wild carrot. When we were in the reserve, we noticed some nomads, and this was interesting to know that there were nomadic people actually traveling through the reserve at this time. And we went to visit them, and in particular asked this woman if she had picked up any garlic or ever picked up garlic when she came through the region. She said she hadn't, but the director of the Chatkal Reserve said that that when people, nomads and local farmers for that matter, are in the region, sometimes they will collect garlic and bring it home, sometimes to eat it directly and sometimes to grow it. And so it was interesting to know that wild garlic is still being collected today by local peoples. But what we're really interested in was finding the wild garlic for ourselves. And here's some wild garlic. The first wild garlic we found growing in the rocks in the Soviet Union. Had to pull the rocks aside and dig a little bit in the soil to get the bulbs out, but they were there. And likewise in the Chatkal Reserve, we found some wild garlic. The pictures I'm going to show you of wild garlic aren't very flashy. We went there at the end of the season so we could get mature bulbs and also seed on those crops that we collected seed on. And again, the plants were quite mature, but we were able to identify them from these seed stalks that you're seeing here. As I mentioned, we were interested in other relatives of onion and garlic, and in this case, this is Allium afflatuense growing in this field. It's about 2 meters tall, these flower stalks. In addition to this large species of Allium, there are 4 or 5 other species in the weeds in this site. So a lot of Alliums in this region. That's not where the garlic was. The garlic was in the rocks. We also went to the Pskem Mountains. This is an overview of what the terrain looks like in generally, and we went into the valleys and again found wild garlic in the similar type of sites as what we found in the Chatkal Reserve growing in the rocks. Pulled the rocks apart, pulled the bulbs out, and got some garlic bulbs. They're often broken up because they're other rocks we had to dig through to get to them. Generally didn't get full bulbs. This is one of the better ones we got. This garlic bulb, it doesn't have a centimeter stick next to it, but those cloves are a pretty typical size, probably about 1.5 inches tall. So, or 3-4 centimeters tall. So this is what the garlic looked like. We collected garlic at 4 different sites in this collecting trip, and we also collected other relatives of Allium, including this close relative of onion, Allium skemensi, which, if you're familiar with what flowering onion looks like, is what this Allium skemensi looks like. So this was a successful trip in that we found some garlic. We wanted to find some more though, and so having had this successful expedition in 1989, wrote another proposal to collect in 2004, and this time I had developed a written relationship interaction with a botanist in the area to help us in the collecting expedition. Again, we saw some beautiful historic sites and buildings. We went to streets scenes to look at seed markets and bulb markets, and I think we got 9 cultivated garlic in markets on this trip. And but the main time was spent collecting wild garlic and its relatives with Furkat Kazanov, which is a botanist at the Turkmen Botanical Institute that I had interacted with by mail, and I had a chance to collect with him over the several weeks we were there in August of 2004. When we were there, Furkat asked this farmer if we could collect on his land, and the farmer was amused but pleased to share that opportunity with us. So we looked for some wild garlic on his land, and this is in addition to myself, the other member of the U.S. team on this trip was Barbara Hellier. Barbara's going to give a talk later in this series, and here Barbara is in action collecting some wild allium seed at this site in Uzbekistan in 2004. So it was Barbara, Furkat, and I collecting in 2004. This is what one of the major sites we collected in was the Lolazor Valley, called the Valley of the Tulips. This is where tulips were discovered by the Turks about 1,000 years ago, and by the Northern Europeans, especially the Dutch, about 1,500 years ago, when the craze for tulips came around. And in April, apparently, you can find you can tour this area and look at flowering tulips, and you could look at flowering garlic too. Not as flashy as tulips, but from my standpoint, a lot more interesting. But we were there later on to collect bulbs from mature plants. Let's see. Yeah. So at this collecting site, then we were looking not only between the rocks, but also in open fields, because in some cases we found some garlic in open fields. At this site, we found some rocks, some garlic growing near the rocks, and unlike the collecting expedition 2004, there are dozens of plants in this area, and all these stalks are garlic plants, and the bulbs were often not as large as what we had seen in the first expedition, probably only about a year old, but big enough to bring back with us. So this was an interesting site because there were dozens of plants here. The farmer that we met apparently spread the word that we were there, and the local population was generous enough to look for some garlic and bring it to us, which they shared. And this is what this young man has in his hand that we had some samples from, thanks to him. Another site we collected wild garlic was next to this road. Growing in the weeds. We went to a farm market, and the women at the vending stations at the markets, they thought there was wild garlic, and sure enough there was. You can see a garlic held in hand on the left side picture, and some bigger bulbs, not very well photographed, but some bigger bulbs on the right in this site called Chimgan. One of the last sites we went to was in Omankatan, south of Samarkand. Garlic growing in the fields again. Here I'm talking to Furkat and a local botanist about the garlic in the area, and there are thousands of garlic plants in this case. In this particular field were knocked over probably by cattle in the region, and the farmer had this was on the edge of a pasture, and the farmer had collected these garlic plants and stacked them up next to the fields, and since they were laying there and for being discarded, we picked them up and were able to get some small bulbs from them. We didn't see many flowering garlic plants, but we saw a few, and this is what the flowers look like in the upper right hand picture in this photo. So the question is, where would you have why would there be so many small garlic plants in one place? And we surmise that perhaps this was because some of the local wild garlic in the region had many top sets or bulbs in previous years. Embedded in the garlic umbel or bulb inflorescence is small bulbs called bulbules or top sets that behave just like the bulbs underground, but they're much smaller, and perhaps those were the starting points of these many small plants that we found in the field. We also visited a local farmer who actually was born in Kazakhstan, went from Kazakhstan to Uzbekistan in her youth, and she's been growing the family garlic since, and she was very generous in sharing these with us. So looking at the collection at these two sites, in 1989 we collected 9 cultivated garlic, 4 wild populations, 6 cultivated garlic. In 2004 in Uzbekistan, 13 wild populations. So now we have a fairly diverse collection of garlic from the wild. And when that wild garlic is grown in cultivation in Wisconsin, some of it grows into quite handsome garlic. Some of it doesn't do well at all. But this wild garlic, when grown in cultivation, at least to some extent, is a good source of new germplasm for garlic improvement. So now we can fill in this picture comparing wild and cultivated carrots, wheat, and potatoes, and also wild garlic compared to cultivated. And looking back at this, tracing the history story, the historical record for garlic is quite strong. There are robust examples of specimens of garlic, and now we have some cultivated garlic and wild garlic to compare next to each other in cultivation, looking at plant appearance and in DNA fingerprints. And I'll tell you that the DNA fingerprints of wild garlic are very similar, in a similar lineage of the wild cultivated garlic, so they're quite closely related. So looking at this whole domestication history of garlic, which is this multi-generation process of adapting wild plants for human use, probably the garlic that's been grown in history almost always has been from bulbs, since that's a lot easier and quicker to grow than growing garlic from seed. Avram Drucker will talk more about this in a subsequent talk, but we're guessing that probably the garlic in history probably was propagated asexually from bulbs, and probably was being picked up by nomads in Central Asia or all the way to North Africa, by Silk Road travelers, by local farmers who picked up garlic, brought it home, planted it, and saw what grew. Maybe that garlic from Egypt and Mesopotamia from 5,000–10,000 years ago was actually from wild garlic in the region at the time. That would be interesting to find out as we go along. But But for sure, we could say that we now have a good idea that there's a broad range of diversity available for garlic improvement, including wild garlic, and now we have the starting point for moving ahead in improving the garlic crop. So with that, I'll conclude my talk. Thank you very much for your time and listening, and we'll look forward to any discussion and questions you may have in the future. This is Phil Simon saying thanks very much. Bye-bye.
Hi there. Can you hear me, Phil?
I can, yes. You hear me?
Yes.
Good.
That was fantastic.
Well, thank you. It was great fun.
Yeah, so interesting. How have you been on other excursions like that one?
Yeah, I've been actually on about 10 others and actually picked up garlic on those too. It's just that those were in parts of the world which probably not where wild garlic occurred, but I picked some up in Portugal, which could have been wild garlic at one point.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, we picked some up in South America, some other wild relatives and carrots, but that wouldn't have been wild garlic in South America.
Mm-hmm. And so when they come back and they're in your collection, are you guys growing them out to preserve them, or have you actively been doing some breeding with them and using them as parent lines to improve garlic? And maybe you want to just say something about like where we are with garlic breeding right now. And Avram's going to talk about that some tomorrow, but it'd be nice to have a little context for the people that are watching today.
Sure. Yeah. No, that's a very interesting question and a lot of my motivation for interest in the crop. And so when the material gets collected, so as I mentioned, half of it stays with the local collectors. So because that's the fair thing to do, they can put it in their collections. And the other half comes back and immediately gets sent to the USDA germplasm collection, which means Barbara Hellier. Mm-hmm. So when we came back from Uzbekistan, that garlic came in through U.S. Customs, and it took extra permits because you're bringing plants in, of course. But anyway, with that process is well worked out. And then all those bulbs and bulb bills that we brought back immediately went to Barbara in Washington State for her maintenance then. And so many of these are in the USDA collection today. We have used them. I've used them to some extent for doing some breeding work on garlic. These wild garlic are a great source of garlic for breeding. There's some reports on the internet saying wild garlic is sterile. That's not what we've found. We found it's the best source of getting seed on garlic, much better than cultivated garlic. So a fair bit of work on it ongoing. Avram is really a leader in this area, and there's been a number of others around the world that have taken quite a bit of effort in producing garlic from seed.
Great, cool. And just to let people know who are watching, Barbara will be speaking to us. She's in Washington, as Bill said, and she'll be speaking to us on Thursday and talking a little bit more about the germplasm collection. So I'll read some of these questions. I've got my notes, I've got my cell phone, and I've got another computer here. So I will try to manage this. So someone did ask, is bulbul formation or loss of true seed propagation considered a sign of domestication?
Yes, that's a great question. Let's put it this way. First of all, a softneck garlic has no bulbils because it has no flower. Mm-hmm. Bulbils only occur in the flowers. And that's a very interesting question by itself. Where does this plant with no flowers come from if it came from a seed at some point? So we don't know the answer to that question. That's one for the audience to figure out and help us answer. But once you have a hardneck garlic in your cultivated collection, most of them are very, very poor in terms of flower production. They will almost always, in fact, I would say they always produce, Avram may give more details, but in my experience, every hardneck garlic does produce bulbils in the cultivated collection. Some of the wild may produce almost no bulbils, but in the cultivated collection we've looked at, they all produce bulbils. I didn't include any pictures, but sometimes these bulbils are as big as a quarter. And so they get so big that they crowd out the flowers for starters. At any rate, answer your question, yes, you will find bulbils in all hardneck garlic. You can propagate it from those bulbils, just takes a lot longer to get a big bulb from it than a typical clove.
Okay. Yeah. Someone asked the question, why does there's a soft neck that doesn't produce a flower? Why,
That's a great question.
it gets confusing too. Like, and then someone else asked about types, which I do think Avram will talk a little bit about. And then we also, just to tell people if they don't know, Avram wrote with Alex Stone, like a garlic types and market niches zine that we just published this past week on Friday. I think I posted it on if you go to the eatwintervegetables.com website, you can look at it. The whole thing is on there. It's like 12 pages long, but it gets into these different types so that you have all these different types of hardnecks. And so maybe you want to talk a little bit about that to say what's the difference in all of these?
Yeah, well, the short answer is we don't know a lot about the difference among them. My lab and others have done some evaluation of diversity of these different cultivated garlics and then a few wild garlic. And if you find cultivated garlics that look more similar but are identified as being different, and you think they are actually different, sometimes they're just duplicates with a different name, but if you think they are similar but somewhat different than another garlic, they typically will show up in their DNA fingerprints as being more similar. But that story is one that hasn't been very well worked out. It's been a fairly high elevation view of garlic diversity. We really don't know a lot about these different types that growers in your viewing audience may be very familiar with in terms of how they differentiate from each other. So not to beg off on the question, but there's really not a lot of really good information out there yet.
Yeah, it's confusing. And then there was a whole section in the zine that just said kind of like uncategorized, which there's lots.
Yes, yeah.
That's not really in a category.
Yeah. Well, the other thing is if again, your viewers probably realize is if they grow garlic, that what they see available in the market, if their growing location is quite different, especially in terms of latitude and season, that garlic may look very different when they grow it compared to what they were expecting. In some cases, it looks just like what they were expecting. And so it's, this whole process of understanding the diversity of the cultivated crop is more complicated than a lot of crops that you grow annually. And, if you're growing beans, you get your beans that year and you can compare them to other beans that are across the country very easily. But the garlic, you have to grow it in the field a couple of years to really get it more or less adapted to your area. Right.
Okay. Hold on. Let me look at this. This says, how can I'm just going to read them off. I haven't read them.
Yeah, sure.
The compassionate garlic community across the US and Canada work with you to cultivate garlic diversity together?
Yeah, well, I think it's the same for what we would say for all crops. Keep eating more, keep sharing it with your friends. And, we've had some conversations about this, Lane, just sharing some of these interesting versions of vegetables that, there's this monolithic idea of what a vegetable is for many consumers. Mm-hmm. This audience that's watching this series, I'm sure, are great ambassadors to the general public. We, in the public sector, universities and government, we try to spread that word, but really, if you get it, if you're at local farm markets, encourage it. Ask the local growers that you are finding locally. Just it's really a bottom-up effort. It's a grassroots effort that's going to make this happen more than anything. And more than anything, share it with kids, with young people, where an interest in the diversity of the vegetable crops really takes off. If you can get kids started on it, it usually lasts a full lifetime.
Yeah. I think looks like it could be a grant proposal we write. Garlic project.
It could be.
A little bit about this before is because we get so much garlic on the broader, big marketplace and grocery stores here that we're getting a lot of imported garlic where the quality is not as good. And, for someone that has used garlic my entire life, I mean, everybody who's watching probably knows I'm Sicilian American. We use garlic, and it's like you depend on that flavor for all of your dishes. And it's really hard to find that, I feel like, in commercial garlic.
Yeah.
To get my more local garlic, we keep talking about Avron, but the people down in Medford and Grants Pass who go to the markets there are lucky people, because he's growing so many different garlics that you can taste, and they're very different from one another.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And then, getting that word out is pretty tough, but and if you look at, say, apples or even potatoes, there's been a fairly good process of defining, especially in apples, varieties. And with looking at projects like what Avram's working on, he gets a winner in terms of a garlic that produces well and has a distinctive flavor. Maybe that's one of the ways to get people more interested, is then they'll expand their thinking to saying, this is just another garlic, to that this is the garlic I want. And that's I think where a lot of this more granular thinking about the crops that we eat comes from.
Yes, I agree. Thank you. Okay, I've got a bunch of text messages from a friend in Hawaii who breathes air. How has garlic changed as it's been moved toward the equator? Does it always need some vernalization to bulb? In Hawaii, folks are growing but vernalizing in the refrigerator. How is garlic produced in the subtropics and tropical countries? And is it so high in the mountains that it does get vernalized?
It's a good question, and we don't know how much of the answer to that question is vernalization versus sensitivity to photoperiod or day length. We don't really know a good answer to that question. There haven't been enough. So this goes to another issue in terms of popularizing and understanding the vegetables that we grow. And that's the simple matter of growing the crop in a field and reporting how it performs. Something that is very valuable would be to have what we might think of as sort of a participatory project of looking at the same garlic cultivars grown in Corvallis and Madison and Atlanta and Houston, and compare the crop in those different areas. Now, the question raised was what happens when you move closer to the equator? And there certainly are some very significant changes that occur when I had a large collection early in my career from Brazil. Very few of them lasted, in the sense that as I planted them, they looked great. The first year, these were all bulbs. Second year, most of them were quite a bit smaller. And by the fourth year, most of them basically were no longer able to produce a bulb. How much of that was vernalization, storage temperature, growing conditions, photoperiod, I don't know. But there seems to be a wide range of adaptation to garlic. In going back to this question, where do we get the garlics we got today? I'm thinking that as explorers picked it up and brought it home, if it was Marco Polo, it'd be in his area. But if somebody went up to northern Germany or into North Africa, they'd probably, all starting with the same material, end up with some that was better in different regions than what their compatriots elsewhere in different geographic regions had. But at any rate, don't have a good answer to that question. That's one that we need to have more garlic trials to really make those kind of comparisons.
Another argument for the big project.
Right.
Yes. Let's see. In your studies in breeding, have you found more resistance to white rot?
There's been a little bit of looking for it, not enough to answer that question either. I'm not familiar with a white rot resistant garlic that has shown up at this point yet. That would be a really important thing. It's white rot has really decimated garlic production around the world. Places like Egypt really dropped their garlic production. thanks to white rot, and it's a big problem in the US. So good question. Don't, again, not enough of us working on garlic. We need more of us working.
I was thinking about this too when you said that the wild garlic isn't growing in places as much because it's so dry. And in your collection, have you found many specimens that are more drought tolerant? You know, I mean,
Yeah,
heavy,
yeah,
heavy.
those are things that take somebody specifically answering that question, and nobody's written that project proposal yet, Lane.
A lot of garlic work. I know you're
Yeah.
talking the history, so we're throwing a lot of things at you. Let's see.
Yeah, well, it's fine.
Yeah. Is it possible for me to improve my seed stock by selecting for preferred characteristics like size, hardiness, etc., year after year?
Probably so. That's probably how the crop has been improved after it was brought into cultivation, is by selecting year after year. And yeah, it's not a very rapid process, but given time, some gradual changes can occur in crops as they're being cultivated for long periods of time, many years.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, and another form of breeder is, so is present diversity of cultivated from the wild all asexually maintained, or is there some evidence of some somatic mutations making new diversity among cultivated garlics? Have you seen this, planting one variety and seeing something new arise from it?
Yeah, I've never seen it. And again, this whole process of me growing a garlic in Wisconsin that I got from Brazil or from Washington takes a couple of years to really know, for it to settle down and be what it would be in Wisconsin. And so I can't really answer. I haven't seen it, no good reports of it, like, you know, something like many red cultivars of potatoes are mutations that show up after it's been grown a while. Russeting and Russet Burbank showed up after the first Burbank came out, but no, I'm not aware of garlic varieties like that.
Abba just told us that it dropped, but it doesn't matter because now I'm the host. It's still playing on YouTube, so we're okay.
Okay.
Let's see. Does taste vary in wild garlic?
Yeah, it does. Yeah, yeah. And it's pretty much the full range of flavor you find in cultivated. But I would say perhaps overall it's a bit more strong in flavor, but that's not always the case, but sort of in general. But yes, it does vary, yes.
When you were there, did you, and in your travels, but particularly this excursion, how did you see them? Like, I guess I was thinking about how they see them preserve it. And did they use all parts of the garlic? Were they using the tops and other things? Or, you know, we talked earlier before,
Yeah.
you know, powdering, you know, in oil,
Right.
doing these things?
Yeah. To be honest, we asked our local collaborators about things like that. Once in a while, we'd ask people in the market. We did not. We did not see any novel products. Let's say garlic stalks being sold in the market, as you know, which some of your viewers probably are familiar with, using garlic stalks when they're not too old, and just cutting them up and maybe stir frying them and using them like garlic bulbs. It's a different flavor, but very good product. But going to that question, what we saw was pretty much, it was all whole garlic bulbs, like that one photo I showed you from the first trip, pretty much like what we're seeing. And in terms of use of garlic, nothing. I mean, people using it more than what the average US consumer would use garlic in their foods, but I don't recall that we ran into any novel uses of garlic beyond what I'm familiar with in the US.
Thinking about garlic flavor, I haven't done a lot of tastings with garlic. I would love to, but after the Sagra that we did, this event that actually when it was an in-person event, and I told you Avram and Andrew Still from Adaptive Seeds curated this room called the Garlic Exploratorium to get into talking about these different types, and Avram was there to share so much knowledge that he has. And people could buy garlic from him there. But Avram gave me a lot of garlic. And so whenever that happens, I'm like, okay, this is a great, opportunity to have my friend Sean Linehan, who does all the Culinary Breeding Network photos, take photos of them in her studio and then taste them, because I had tons of it. So I had maybe 6 people come over to my house, and all these garlics. I mean, I think we did maybe 18 to 20 different garlic, which is just
Wow.
sizable to try to taste that many. But someone was a chef, there's a couple of farmers, and then there's just a couple of other ones of us that just wanted to taste them. And we shaved them with a mandolin and put them in little teeny cups of grapeseed oil because it's mild, and tasted them. And it was amazing how different they tasted from one another. We took notes of them, and I actually ordered my garlic seed from Avram this year based on that. What I like the most.
Yeah.
It was from my top 3 from 3 different categories of garlic, which was really interesting. But
Yeah.
flavors, I think of it kind of like as a graph where it's like the heat either peaking or and fading out, or building. And that information I really would love people to get. I know Avram's written a lot of this up from his own studies himself, because I think it would make, if we had this nuanced information, then it would help us to decide which garlic we're going to use in a dish.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
don't have that yet, but I just remembered it and thought I would share it with you.
Yeah, well, there's whole books written on wine flavors, and I think there's room for a book on garlic flavors.
Yep, we're gonna make the garlic flavor wheel. Okay, I'm gonna look for some more questions here. I read that one. Let's see, different types. Sorry, let me just get through this real quick. Are there any new diverse garlic from your study on the market now? And if so, what are they called?
I'm not sure of new types. There's been some new garlic named cultivars shown up in the market. I can't name them, and a couple of the garlics that were collected in that first trip are being grown by growers in the U.S. today, because like I said, they end up in the collection that Barbara maintains, and people access those samples and end up propagating them if they do well. Mm-hmm. So some that were in that collection that had come out of the collecting expedition materials. But there's certainly other sources that come in. People around the world eat garlic. It's a crop that, compared to the other vegetables I work on around the world, there's a lot more people are interested and willing to talk about and have ideas about garlic. Mm-hmm. We talked about for consumers in the U.S. And so I think there's a lot more out there. The question is whether it all can be grown in the U.S. But anyway, to answer your question, I don't have a clear answer to it. Sorry.
Is there garlic that's available from the GRIN database that people can access? Can you get
yes,
bulbs, or do you get seed, or? No,
you only get bulbs. There's no seed available. The getting seed is there's not, Avram would be probably the only source of seed. I've got a little bit, but not much. I haven't produced that much, but so it's all bulbs, and and so if you get things from the collection, Barbara will ask you, please give your opinion. Did it grow? How did you like it? That sort of thing. So the importance of the collection is that then that information is available to anybody else that might be wanting to use it. Mm-hmm. you know, I would say if you get it from Barbara, be sure you propagate it. Don't just eat it, because
Right.
it's some precious material. And so not to say you can't eat it, but to be a good citizen, I would recommend that you please grow garlic from those bulbs you get, and do that for your evaluations primarily. But they are in the Grin collection, yes. That's Barbara can tell you, but it's a fairly good sized collection now.
Great. Another question from our Hawaiian friend. Are there other relatives of garlic that we're missing out on? Candidates to start domesticating or cultivating?
Yeah, I think there are. The only specific example I know of is one from Tunisia. I had a cooperative project in Tunisia where Allium rosium, which is kind of looks, its closest comparison would be chives. It's very different looking from chives, but it's used like chives. The leaves and the stalks and perhaps the flowers. It's used as a local flavor, spice, and herbal medicine in Tunisia. Grows wild there. A collaborator there collected the wild Allium rosium. In this case, it was seed that he collected. He grew it out, and some of it produced a great crop in cultivation pretty much the next year. It was an important discovery in the sense that Allium rosium is becoming extinct in the landscape of Tunisia because it gets over collected and it's so dry there. It does grow okay there, but it needs some water. And so that would be an example of a crop that I could point to and say, this is crop that if you wanted to start a new allium crop, get a collection of Allium rosium seed. To be honest, I'm not sure what Barbara has in hand for that species, but you could do it. Then of course, probably many of your audience knows about the ramp festivals of places like North Carolina or that part of the country where this is a species that grows wild. So some of these species can be brought into cultivation. The example I would point to again is Allium rosium because I know it. But then there's some of these wild alliums are very difficult, even if the locals may collect them and consume them, they're very difficult to propagate outside of up in the wild. Sometimes there's very long seed dormancy. Sometimes they just don't grow well at all in cultivation. Going back to the specific question, there are different uses of things like garlic and leek and onion and different versions. There's a clonal version of onion that's not very well known in the US, that's widely grown in parts of the world basically from bulbils and from sets. It's very similar to I know I'm drawing a blank on the other very close relative of onion that's used for cooking a lot, shallots. But and so yeah, offhand I'm not familiar with a lot of these. Are my reading experience more than active hands-on experiences are in Asia. So offhand don't have a lot of good suggestions, but I think there probably are a fair number of opportunities out there.
Yeah, I'm a really big fan of the French gray shallot that doesn't grow like the Dutch shallots. When you pull it out of the ground, all the bulbs kind of fall apart.
Right.
And a very tight skin that gets very hard and shrivels up against it. But the flavor is like not comparable to.
Right, yeah.
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 For those,
the alliums are a great group.
I say grow the French gray shallot. I really, yeah. One thing that you mentioned and that we're going to touch on later on this week is medicinal properties. But as you said, like medicine, I wonder in your travels if the folks that you were visiting did kind of refer to and think of garlic as medicine in their cultures.
I believe they do. This probably only came up as an immediate discussion point when I mentioned when we saw those nomads in the 1989 trip going across at that time the Southern Soviet Union, and the woman that we talked to said that she used garlic but didn't go into any details. But the director of that nature reserve said that garlic was being used for medicinal purposes and preservation purposes to some extent too, to assist in the preservation of certain foods. It adds both flavor and some probably inhibitors of things that might spoil food.
Yeah.
And so garlic does have that use and is used, I think, with that in mind. Whether they're, it's one of those things where somebody else needs to take an information collecting expedition to talk to people and find out what these crops are used for. I think that, and that's what a lot of botanists in economic botany do this, and they get a lot of information. I didn't pick up a lot on that as we were traveling, though.
Okay. Let's see. Are there growing regions in the U.S. similar to the areas from your collections? Is there an ideal place in the States for garlic production?
Most of the U.S. large-scale production is California, and the reason that that's California is that's a very good place to be growing garlic. So if you have those, you think about it as you mentioned, maybe it's too dry for garlic, and I think certainly it can be too dry, but the crop seems to do relatively well, not as well as some, but relatively well with not as much water as some other crops. And that dry period that comes up with growing in California, just by nature of being in California, is going to be generally quite good. Mm-hmm. And so I think that, I think where you're at up in Oregon, down through California, any of those climates across the country like that can work. There's certainly very good garlic production in wetter areas of the country as well. Hasn't quite had the I guess maybe the information or promotional aspect to it that you have of other than the Gilroy Garlic Festival, in terms of I haven't seen too many competitors for that Gilroy Garlic Festival. But
yeah. Okay, let's see. I know we're gonna have a festival as soon as we can get together.
Good. Okay, that sounds good.
You're a crown. You're gonna be the king. King. All of you guys will be like, the garlic royalty. Let's see. In your travels, what have you noticed about regional preferences for different garlics?
Boy, that's hard to tell. Again, that really takes somebody that, first of all, the local people will say they like their local garlic, but is that local garlic that we picked up in Samarkand even the same local garlic as in Tashkent? Now we've got samples, we can compare those two, but whether, exactly why people typically prefer their local versions of the crop, it's not very clear. How much of that is due to availability? If they're actually growing the crop, is that an issue? Can they grow it easier? So again, it's very anecdotal type of bits, pieces of information, and putting this big puzzle together, it's going to take, there needs to be really large networks of information to get this kind of information, to get this kind of idea out there.
Yeah, I feel like it's really hard to you think that you'll be able to capture all of this when you go on a trip. I just did this radicchio expedition where 22 of us went to Italy and was like, let's look at radicchio production. Let's talk about seed. Let's look at how they, eat radicchio. And you get there and it's just overwhelming amount of information, things you never would have even thought about. And then you're to focus on trying to figure out all of those things and to have, I think that also when you go somewhere, the people, they don't share exactly what they do with something because they're not even conscious of it,
Yeah, right.
You're doing, and you don't think, I mean, maybe they're using garlic and they really like a really hot, spicy one, but they've never even really eaten one that wasn't. And so they're not even thinking of it as that. I think that one thing is in the US, we do, and that folks are probably tuning in, is we have seen a lot of diversity within different species that we're eating. And so we are asking all these questions to ourselves. But then when you go to a place where the place is, this is what how they've always grown it, how they've always eaten it. There's a lot of things that aren't communicated to us because it's not on their minds, you know?
Right, right. Yeah, they don't have necessarily have a point of reference to go to themselves. Yeah, it's very tough to really answer a question like that. Again, people like what they have locally because they're familiar with it. But then there's the other variable too, is the difference in us as consumers, whether you were raised with that as part of your diet, whether you have a greater sensitivity. You and I probably have some different preferences just based on our olfactory sensibilities. And so how much, this is a whole career worth of study to answer, even for garlic, I think, and not to diminish anybody taking it on. I think it starts with bits and pieces, but I think that this is a great question with, like most of my answers have been, I don't know.
It's okay. It's good questions for us to ask, to work on, to answer. I want to be conscious of your time. We do have 3 more questions if you want to answer.
Sure.
Yeah?
Yeah, I'm fine with that. Sure.
Great. So, how does a garlic adapt to a new place if it's not sexually reproducing? What is changing that humans select upon?
Yeah, just the ability. I mentioned my experience in growing this collection of garlic I got from Brazil. Just does the crop even grow when you plant it? Does it produce a nice big bulb like the garlic you've been growing? Again, is this photoperiod, environmental conditions, soil issues? Don't know. We attribute it typically to photoperiod because that's such a big variable, but don't really know if that's what's going on. I'm not quite sure how to answer that question, but it's something you just try it out and see what works, and that kind of answers it for you. And that's not a very good answer, but that's the best we have right now.
Yeah, great. Do you have any insight on interspecific crosses with alliums, like crossing ramps with another species?
Yeah. So there's been some crosses actually made between, there's been one report of onion and garlic, and there's some between bunching onion and onion. It's quite easy to do, to make that cross. That's been done several different times. We didn't talk much about bunching onions as a separate crop, but that's a different species as well. And probably the closest relative to garlic, we've looked into this a little bit, and there's about 600 species of alliums, depending on the taxonomist you talk to. In this group that includes garlic, I haven't looked at this for a while, but as I recall, there weren't many that were very well known to be of any particular interest from a culinary or from a crop production standpoint. I think that's open. Like I said, there's been one report of one successful onion garlic cross. That's quite a wide cross. And it was not able to be propagated outside of human handling of it. Would not produce any seed, for instance. But I think there's some interesting things there. Some of these have been done. Again, lots can be done yet too. I think as we look at something like disease resistance, that's where these questions come up, especially if we found a close relative of garlic that is a seed producer that's white rot resistant, going back to an earlier question, we'd be on that right away. But so far I haven't seen the evidence for that.
Yeah. Okay, we have one last question from Abba.
Okay.
And introduce Abba as our tech support, because if she wasn't here, none of this would happen, because Phil and I would not know what to do. I mean, maybe.
Right. Thanks, Abba.
Yeah,
you figure it out.
Yeah, Productions. Thank you so much. And your garlic question.
Yeah, I was just fascinated that so many of the wild species that you found on your expedition were in rocks. And I wondered if there was any local knowledge around why that happened, or anybody who's tried to cultivate them in rocks here, or just why you think that might be, or...
So they weren't really, they were beneath rocks, I would say, Ava. So this is terrain where you've got these rocks that are anywhere from ping pong to basketball size rocks with lots of rough edges. And you think about these garlic bulbils or bulbs being broken up and carried around by the wind or by animals. They're going to fall between the rocks. And if they land in a crevice where there's enough moisture and soil, they'll take off. So these bulbs we dug up from between the rocks were pretty tough shape, because they were literally in tough shape because they're growing between rocks and shaped by the rocks around them. But they were growing in soil. It was basically the safest place that they could propagate without wind, rain, animals coming through and breaking off the flower stalks and leaves, for instance. So I don't think the rocks per se were necessarily an advantage to production, other than protecting that early growing plant. That's our guess.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Cool. Thank you so much, Phil. This has been
Well, thank you.
I really appreciate you being willing to be the first person.
Sure.
I mean, I think that everything that you had to share with us was so interesting for the folks, and we will have it recorded and we'll put it up on YouTube. So I'll send you the link, and other people too, and they'll be able to watch it and share it with others if you like.
Yeah.
I want to let you know that I just really appreciate your work and your love of garlic, and thank you so much for all that you do. I'm looking forward to seeing you here in person next year.
Well, yeah, it'd be great to see you again in person, Lane, and eat some garlic with you. But it's really been great to have this opportunity. Thank you so much for putting this together, and Abba for great help on this. So thanks so much for helping get the word out. I think some of these questions are able to be crowdsourced for answers. So I think the audience out there can maybe there's a graduate student in the future, somebody at OSU or UW can come up with to get that kind of answers. So anyway, this is great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. And we have a whole week of garlic, and tomorrow,
Yes.
I guess, same time, same place, every day, 10 a.m. Pacific time. Tomorrow, Avram Drucker from Garlic Canna will be speaking, which is a really special situation because he doesn't do a lot of talks. And so he'll be here, and he has a lot of knowledge about garlic to drop on us. We'll see if we can keep it to an hour. I'm not sure if we will be able to. So join us here the rest of the week, and thank you.